Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Richard Whitfield said 12 minutes before Megan O'Brien walked out of Seattle General's cafeteria with scattered charts in her arms and nothing on her face but ice. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like insects trapped in glass, a sound that hasn't stopped in 3 weeks. Megan adjusts the 4 line for the patient in room 304, a classified assignment, though no one here knows it, her hands moving with the kind of economy that comes from muscle memory no civilian nurse should have. Steady. Precise. The kind of hands that have held bleeding children in marja dust. She's been at Seattle General for exactly 21 days, and every one of those days has required her to be smaller than she is, quieter than her training allows, deferential in a way that tastes like copper when she bites the inside of her cheek. Her locker contains 2 pairs of shoes, white Dansko clogs and, at the very bottom, a pair of worn combat boots with cracked leather that still holds marja dust in the treads. 23 years old. The laces are frayed at the ends. A scar runs down her left forearm in surgical precision, the kind you get when shrapnel is removed in field conditions without anesthesia because there is no field hospital, only a convoy and a medic named Torres who whispered apologies while working. Nobody at Seattle General has asked about the scar. Nobody asks about anything. They see a 26-year-old woman with a small-town accent and a nursing degree from a college they've never heard of, and they stop looking. Dr. Richard Whitfield arrives for morning rounds like a ship arriving in a harbor, trailing residents in his wake like ducklings following their mother. His Rolex catches the fluorescent light as he flips through charts with the kind of casual dismissal that comes from knowing the hospital board will never question him. 3 board members owe him favors. The CFO plays golf with him every Thursday. When he reaches Megan's station, he pauses. She's annotated billing codes in red ink on the chart for patient 304, a geriatric male admitted with pneumonia, prescribed $97,000 worth of diagnostic imaging that the clinical presentation doesn't support. "You're very thorough," Dr. Whitfield says, for someone so new. The way he emphasizes the word new is deliberate. 2 nurses glance away. One pretends to read the monitor. Megan continues documenting vital signs, her pen moving at a steady pace, pulse 72, blood pressure 128/81, oxygen saturation 98% on room air. Everything normal. Everything controlled. The imaging codes looked high, Megan says. Her voice is soft. Deferential. A small-town nurse who is still learning. "I wanted to make sure." Dr. Whitfield smiles. It's the smile of someone who has never been questioned before, who sees questioning as a personal insult wrapped in professional language. "I'm sure the attending physician knows what he ordered," he says. Then he walks away, his footsteps echoing down the tile corridor like a countdown timer no one else can hear. That afternoon, the staff lounge smells like old coffee and the kind of stillness that comes right before someone says something cruel. Megan refills her cup, black, no sugar, no cream, and stands near the window where rain is starting to hammer the glass. The water streams down in patterns that almost look like code, like the binary her brother used to write on napkins before he stopped calling home. Dr. Whitfield enters with 3 residents trailing behind him, and he announces loudly enough that everyone stops mid-conversation, "I give the small-town nurse 1 week before she quits. Any takers on the bet?" 3 doctors laugh immediately. One of them, Dr. Marcus Pierce, the cardiac fellow, says, 200 says she doesn't make it through Friday. Whitfield nods. Done. Megan continues refilling her coffee without looking up. The pot makes a sound like artillery in the distance, and she thinks about a moment in Helmand Province when she was extracting a 6-year-old boy from a collapsed building, and the sound the concrete made when it shifted and nearly crushed them both. Small. Sharp. Definitive. This, the bet, the laughter, the casual cruelty of powerful men in a staff lounge, doesn't even register on that scale. It's background noise. Wind through a canyon. Nothing that can kill you. She sits at the table near the window. Alone, but visible. Present but unremarkable. This is the art she has perfected across 23 years of service, the ability to be invisible while being exactly where you need to be. The residents watch her, waiting for a reaction. For tears, maybe. For indignation. For the small-town nurse to prove that she doesn't belong here. Megan takes a drink of coffee. It's terrible. Hospital coffee always is. She makes a mental note that the machine needs cleaning, scale buildup is affecting the temperature distribution, and returns to her cup without expression. The day moves like that for hours. Noon rounds. 1 p.m. medication pass. 2 p.m. patient education for a diabetic man who keeps sneaking Snickers bars from his wife. By lunchtime the next day, Megan has settled into the rhythm of Seattle General, the way water settles into the shape of whatever container holds it. She eats alone at a corner table with a sandwich she made that morning, something with hummus and avocado, nothing that requires her to be near anyone else. Dr. Whitfield enters the cafeteria at 12:56 p.m. He's flanked by a pharmaceutical representative and 2 residents, and he's gesturing with the kind of expansive confidence that comes from never being told no. His lunch tray is expensive, fresh salmon, imported water, the kind of meal that reminds everyone of the hierarchy they're all participating in. Megan sees him approaching. Not because she's watching him, but because part of her brain has been cataloguing his movements for 3 weeks now. In Marja, that instinct kept her alive. In a cafeteria in Savannah, it's just habit. He accidentally bumps her shoulder. The tray falls. Charts scatter across the floor like leaves in a windstorm. Salmon, salad, water glass, everything mixing together in a cascade of institutional failure. 30 staff members stop moving. The room doesn't just go quiet. The room holds its breath, the way the world holds its breath right before something breaks. "Pick that up, sweetheart," Dr. Whitfield says, and his voice is honeyssweet and filled with venom. "You're still just a nurse, after all." The silence is total. It has weight. Texture. Like the silence in a tactical operation center right before a mission goes live. Megan sets down her sandwich. Her hands don't tremble. Her face doesn't burn red. She doesn't retreat to a supply closet to cry or freeze in place or let her voice crack with anger. Instead, she stands. Slowly. Deliberately. And she looks directly at Dr. Whitfield for the first time since she arrived at Seattle General. It's not a confrontational look. It's worse than that. It's the look of someone who has seen worse men than him die in the desert, who has held the last breaths of people he loved, who understands that this moment, this petty cruelty in a hospital cafeteria, is less important than the dust on her combat boots at home. "Of course," she says quietly. She kneels. The floor is cold through her scrubs. She gathers the papers first, stacking them carefully, checking each page for damage. The food she ignores for now. Water, salmon, salad, it can wait. The papers matter. The charts matter. The documentation matters. Someone moves to help her. Megan gives them a look that says no, just a small shake of her head. A glance. The nurse steps back. She works methodically. Gathering. Stacking. Organizing. Her jaw clenches once, just once, while she reaches for a piece of paper that has slid under the beverage station. But there is no tremor in her hands. No tears. No voice crack. When she stands, the stack of papers is perfect. Organized by patient name. Every page accounted for. "Thank you for the reminder, doctor," she says. Still soft. Still deferential. But there's something underneath it now, something like cold steel wrapped in velvet. "I'll be more careful." She walks back to her corner table. Finishes her sandwich. Washes her hands at the sink and clocks back in at 1:14 p.m. for the afternoon shift. The room is still silent. 30 staff members are staring at where she was, at the space she's left behind, and something in that silence feels like a beginning. That night, alone in her studio apartment on the edge of Savannah, 1 bedroom, exposed brick, a kitchenette that barely functions, Megan stands in front of her closet. The combat boots are on the bottom shelf, shoved behind a laundry basket filled with off-duty clothes. She pulls them out. The leather is cracked from desert heat and too many years of being what they needed to be. The soles are worn thin. The laces are frayed. She sits on the edge of her bed and just looks at them. 23 years of naval special warfare in those boots. Deployments to Marja, Helmand Province, Cunha Valley. 3 Navy Crosses. A Silver Star. 2 Purple Hearts. Training younger operators who called her even though she'd told them not to. Leading teams through mountain passes that didn't exist on any official map. A medical specialty earned because in the field, you don't always have a medic, you have whoever is closest and knows how to keep someone alive. She allows herself exactly 2 minutes of doubt. 60 seconds of thinking about calling her handler, requesting extraction, walking away from this hospital and this cover and this patient who needs her to be a nurse instead of what she actually is. 120 seconds of remembering Marja, of remembering the 6-year-old boy she pulled from rubble, of remembering what it felt like to be someone whose job was to save lives in places where death came from the sky. At 2 minutes and 1 second, she stands. She returns the boots to the closet. She closes the closet door. By morning, the doubt is locked away where it belongs, and Megan O'Brien is just a nurse again, quiet, deferential, small. But that's the kind of lie you tell with your clothes and your voice and the way you hold your shoulders. The truth lives somewhere else. The truth lives in the space between what she shows them and what she actually is, and that space is getting smaller every single day. By Friday, everyone at Seattle General knew about the bet. Not because Dr. Whitfield had whispered it, because he'd announced it like he was reading lottery numbers at a press conference. The small-town nurse won't last a week, he'd said in the staff lounge, loud enough for the med students to hear, loud enough for the charge nurse to pause mid-sip of her coffee. Loud enough for it to become the kind of office legend that spreads faster than a nosocomial infection. He'd even checked his watch, made a show of it, the way a man does when he's already written the ending and just needs the audience to watch him be right. 2 days. That's all it took for Dr. Whitfield to weaponize that bet into something sharper than contempt. The thing about competitive cruelty is that it requires an audience, and he had one. Medical students trailing him on rounds, board members he'd cultivated, nurses who owed him favors or feared what happened when they didn't. He'd learned that public humiliation works best when it's slow enough that no single moment looks catastrophic, when it's spread across enough incidents that she starts to seem like the problem. Not him. Never him. Tuesday morning he struck first at the nurse's station, his voice carrying across the floor with the precision of someone used to having rooms go quiet when he entered. "I need Miss O'Brien reassigned. Immediately." The charge nurse, Patricia, 15 years at Seattle General, a woman who'd watched 3 chiefs of surgery come and go, looked up from her schedule. "Reassigned where?" "Geriatric floor. The afternoon shift." He didn't look at Megan. That was the cruelty of it. "I need someone competent on the cardiac unit today." The word sat there like a scalpel on a tray. Competent. As if she'd failed something. As if her 3 weeks of flawless medication administration, perfect vital sign documentation, never a single missed order, as if all of that had vanished because he'd decided it had. Megan stood at the empty nurse's station, watching him walk away, and allowed her jaw to clench for exactly 2 seconds. 1 breath. 2. Then nothing. Her face went completely blank, not the blank of someone holding back tears, but the blank of someone filing information away, the kind of stillness that comes from having learned, over 23 years, that emotion is a luxury she couldn't afford. She gathered her tablet from the station, turned, and walked toward the geriatric floor without a word to anyone. The cardiac unit nurses watched her go. A medical student, 3rd year, naive enough to still believe the world was fair, whispered to his resident. "Why'd he pull her?" "She's been great with the post-op patients." "Politics," the resident said quietly. "Just keep your head down." Wednesday came with its own calculated humiliation. Dr. Whitfield rounded with 5 medical students, and he made sure Megan was present at the nurse's station as they passed. One of his patients, a 68-year-old man recovering from a coronary bypass, was scheduled for 2 milligrams of midazolam for anxiety before discharge education. Megan had documented it on the chart. He held up the medication order in front of the students, his voice pitched to carry. This dosage. Can someone explain the pharmacokinetics? Megan didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't even look at him. Miss O'Brien. Perhaps you can walk these students through the calculation. Since you're the one who pulled this order. She turned. Walked over. Her hands were steady on the clipboard. Her voice came out exactly level, as if she were reading a weather report. Midazolam. Benzodiazepine. Half-life of 1.5 to 2.5 hours. 2 milligrams for a post-op patient with standard BMI and no liver compromise is within safe parameters. And the mechanism? GABA receptor agonist. CNS depression. Anxiolytic without significant cardiac effects. Why not 3 milligrams? Respiratory depression risk increases exponentially above 2 milligrams in older patients. You teach that in your own lecture series, Dr. Whitfield. One of the med students shifted. Another looked down at his notes. The moment stretched, just long enough for everyone to understand that she'd answered perfectly, which meant the question had been a trap, which meant she'd just made him look small in front of people whose opinions mattered to his career. He smiled. That shark smile. The kind that comes right before something dies. Good. Maybe you are listening after all. He walked away, already talking to the students about something else, already pivoting the narrative so that the moment belonged to him. But Megan had felt the temperature of the room change. Felt the weight of what she'd just done, not the mistake of missing an answer, but the worse mistake of being competent when he decided she shouldn't be. She'd broken an unspoken rule: don't make him look bad in front of his people. The geriatric floor assignment stuck. Every morning she arrived to find her patient load already distributed to other nurses. The cardiac unit was a foreign country now, its hallways off limits except when she wasn't there to see them. Dr. Whitfield had a way of creating distance that felt like absence, like she'd never actually worked there at all. The specific patient she was monitoring, the one whose vital signs were part of the larger operation, the reason she was here, the reason she couldn't walk away, was now being managed by another RN. She'd find the chart in the system, pull up dates when no one was looking, document her observations in the system itself where algorithms wouldn't flag the access as unusual. It was enough. It had to be enough. But that wasn't the worst part. By Friday, by the time the fluorescent lights of the hospital cafeteria hummed their familiar electronic song and Megan pushed through the double doors in her scrubs, she realized that he'd moved from isolation to humiliation. He was ready to remind everyone why she was never going to belong here. She carried her tray, salad she wasn't hungry for, coffee that had gone lukewarm while she checked on her geriatric patients, and the patient chart she'd been reviewing during her truncated lunch break. She moved through the rows of tables where doctors and nurses and administrators sat in their careful hierarchies, where Dr. Whitfield had chosen his seat at the table closest to the main corridor for maximum visibility. For board members with him. For people whose opinions shaped hospital policy, whose votes decided futures. He was telling them something about his lake house, about waterfront property in the Columbia River Gorge, about a surgeon's life earned the right to certain comforts. Megan didn't see his foot until her shin met it. The tray went down like a building collapsing. Salad scattered across the tile in a chaos of letters and dressing. The coffee mug shattered on contact, releasing its dark liquid across the floor in a stain that looked like something had died there. The patient chart exploded, papers flying, scattering, some landing in the spilled food, others sliding across the floor like they were looking for shelter. 30 conversations stopped at the sound. 30 people turned to look. Megan dropped to one knee, her hand already reaching for the papers. Steady. Not shaking. Not red in the face. Not apologizing. Pick that up, sweetheart, Dr. Whitfield said. He didn't even pause. He turned back to the board member on his left and resumed his sentence about the property taxes. As if nothing had happened. As if she wasn't there on her hands and knees in front of 30 witnesses who were now carefully not looking. A janitor appeared, God bless him, a man named Marcus who'd worked at Seattle General for 14 years and had seen enough hospital politics to recognize a setup when he saw one. He brought a mop without being asked. Megan continued gathering the papers, her breathing steady, her face showing absolutely nothing. Not the shame he wanted her to feel. Not the anger that would justify his narrative about her being unstable. Not even the flinch that would confirm she was breakable. She was a blank slate, a closed door, someone who'd been taught decades ago that the only power she had was the power to refuse to give him what he wanted. She thanked Marcus quietly. She threw the papers away, they were unsalvageable anyway, and continued her afternoon shift in the geriatric unit, where she spent the next 4 hours checking vital signs and medication interactions and watching the clock move toward 5 o'clock with the precision of someone counting down to extraction. Her hands didn't shake. Not once. Not in front of anyone. It was 30 minutes after the cafeteria incident, standing alone in the supply closet with the door closed and the industrial shelving looming in the fluorescent light, that her hands finally shook. 60 seconds. That's all she allowed herself. 60 seconds of trembling that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with restraint, the kind of trembling that comes from holding something so heavy that your muscles burn from the effort of not dropping it. Then she locked it down again. Clinical. Methodical. Military. The woman who'd been 6 years old Megan O'Brien for exactly 1 minute was gone, and the woman who was Master Chief Petty Officer remained. What Dr. Whitfield didn't know was that she documented every billing irregularity, every inflated code, every kickback arrangement that had passed through his department. What he couldn't know was that the patient in the cardiac unit, the one she was monitoring through back channels and system access that wouldn't trigger alarms, was critical to an investigation that reached far beyond Seattle General's walls. She needed 2 more weeks. 14 days for the paperwork to reach the right people. 14 days to finish what she'd started. Then she could leave this place and everyone in it behind. She didn't know that Tuesday evening, when the cardiac arrest alarm screamed through the parking lot at 6 p.m., that 2 weeks would become 0. That the mission she'd sacrificed so much to keep intact would shatter like her coffee mug, scattering across a parking lot in the space between heartbeats. The cardiac arrest alarm screamed through the parking lot at 6 p.m. on a sweltering Tuesday evening. Megan heard it from her car, still in her scrubs, the fabric clinging to her skin like a second layer of exhaustion. She'd clocked out 18 minutes ago. She was supposed to go home. She was supposed to pretend to be somebody else. The body lay sprawled across the asphalt near the emergency entrance, bystanders frozen in that helpless semicircle people form when catastrophe arrives without warning. No pulse. No response. A man in his mid-50s, athletic build, collapsed mid-stride from the parking garage. Megan's car was 30 feet away. She covered the distance in 4 seconds flat. She didn't announce herself. Didn't call for help. Her hands were already moving, assessing, finding the landmarks on his chest with the precision of someone who'd done this on battlefields while rounds snapped overhead. Ribs. Sternum. The notch where the clavicle meets the breastbone. Standard CPR wasn't going to work. She could see it in the man's color, in the way his chest rose and fell with nothing behind it. Cardiac tamponade. Fluid around the heart compressing it like a fist. The audience watching didn't understand. They just saw a nurse. A security guard was already on his radio. "We have a code blue in the northwest lot, I'm calling EMS now." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. 12 minutes. ETA 12 minutes for an ambulance that wasn't going to arrive in time. Megan reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out the pocket knife she carried for exactly this kind of impossible moment. The blade was 3 inches long. Surgical steel. She'd kept it sharp for 7 years, through 2 civilian assignments, through 1 year of monitored silence watching patients who didn't know she was there to save their lives, and through 2 weeks of Dr. Whitfield's calculated contempt. The knife caught the evening light like it had been waiting. She cut through fabric and skin with a movement so fluid it looked almost gentle. The bleeding was immediate and controlled. She knew the anatomy like she knew the names of the Helmand Province valleys, every artery, every nerve, every breath space between the ribs. Fourth intercostal space. Left side. The incision was perfect. Clean. Military precise. The security guard made a sound like a choked breath. Someone behind him whispered, is she actually? But Megan was already past words, past the performance of being a civilian, past anything that wasn't the immediate mathematics of keeping this man alive for the next 10 minutes. She widened the incision with her hands. Muscle memory took over. Her shoulders had done this in Kandahar with a helicopter door gunner bleeding out. Her hands had done this in a compound in Marja while mortars walked closer, the impacts like a metallic heartbeat getting faster. The pericardium opened with a hiss, a sound like compressed air escaping from a valve, like the world exhaling. Dark fluid spilled across her fingers. Tamponade. The diagnosis confirmed. She was in the chest cavity now, her hand moving with the terrible knowledge of someone who'd reached into bodies before, who'd held lives together when the only thing between someone and death was the reach of your arm and the refusal to accept the alternative. Her fingers found the heart. It wasn't beating. Just sitting there like a stone, paralyzed by the pressure surrounding it. She began to compress. Manual cardiac massage. 1 squeeze. 2. 3. Her hand moved in a rhythm that had no name in civilian medicine because civilian doctors learned this in textbooks while military medics learned it in the dirt with incoming fire. The compressions were exactly 60 beats per minute, not because she was counting but because her body knew the rhythm like it knew how to breathe. Come on, she said to the collapsed man, to the heart in her hand, to the 12 minutes that were somehow already 8 minutes now. Come on. The first squeeze produced nothing. The second produced a shudder. By the third compression his eyes flickered, not consciousness but some primitive reflex, some deep-coded survival message from a brain still barely alive. His skin was pink now instead of grey. Oxygenation. The compressions were working. The ambulance appeared 2 minutes before EMS was supposed to arrive. The paramedics spilled out, took in the scene, and one of them, a woman with sergeant major's bearing despite her civilian uniform, nodded once at Megan with the recognition of someone who'd seen military trauma work before. Keep doing that, she said. Don't stop. Megan didn't stop. Not while they were loading him onto the stretcher. Not while they were running toward the ambulance bay. Not until they had him inside, on their stretcher, with their monitors, and they were asking her the single question that would destroy everything. What's his name? Do you know him? No, Megan said, and it was the truth spoken in a parking lot where everything was about to change. She watched them go, then looked down at her hands. Blood covered her to the wrists. It had soaked into her scrubs up to the elbows. There was blood in her hair somehow, though she couldn't remember how it got there. She stood motionless in the parking lot, adrenaline finally catching up, and that's when she saw him. Dr. Whitfield emerged from the ER entrance at 8:12 p.m., his pressed jacket somehow still pristine, his expression already calculating before he'd taken 3 steps toward the police officer interviewing the security guard. The security guard was showing him something on a tablet, the parking lot footage, she realized. Real-time, digital, undeniable evidence. She watched the calculation happen behind Whitfield's eyes like watching a safe crack open. The moment stretched. He looked at the blood on her hands. He looked at her face, at the strange calm that didn't match the violence she'd just committed. He looked at the security footage showing her hands inside a human chest cavity, performing a procedure that existed in military trauma protocols but had no home in civilian medicine. Then he smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd just realized his enemy had handed him a weapon. He turned immediately and walked back into the hospital, already reaching for his phone. Megan stood in the parking lot, the evening heat pressing down like a hand, and she understood that the mission was over. That 23 years of compartmentalization had just exploded into a parking lot under the sodium lights. That everything she'd built to stay invisible had just become impossible to hide. She walked toward the emergency entrance because that's what people did when they'd saved someone's life. They followed up. They wanted to know if the patient survived. That was normal. That was civilian. That was the story she would tell. But inside, ascending the back stairs to the cardiac unit instead of using the main elevators, wiping blood from her hands with paper towels that turned pink and then red, she knew the truth. The man she'd saved, she still didn't know his name. She'd acted on pure survival instinct, the kind of instinct that didn't ask questions, that didn't calculate consequences, that just moved forward into the impossible because the alternative was a body in a parking lot and a family that never got to bury him. She would learn his name in 20 minutes when Dr. Whitfield made his first call to the board. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Dr. Whitfield had been right all along, not about her being weak, but about her being dangerous. She'd just proved it in a parking lot with a pocket knife and her bare hands, and now every camera in the hospital had it recorded, time-stamped, undeniable. The blood on Megan Scrubs was still wet when Dr. Whitfield saw her stepping out of the elevator at 6:02 p.m., her hands trembling, not from fear but from the adrenaline crash that always came after saving someone's life. The parking lot had been chaos. The man's chest cavity had been open. She'd reached inside with her bare hands. Whitfield's jaw tightened as he watched her move through the corridor, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not admiration. Recognition. She'd just demonstrated capability he couldn't control, and control was the only currency he understood. He was on his phone before she disappeared around the corner. 3 calls. One to hospital board member Harrison Pierce, who'd approved Whitfield's diagnostic kickback arrangement with Meridian Medical Supply in exchange for 40% of the profits. Another to board member David Sterling, whose daughter's tuition Whitfield had paid after a messy lawsuit. A third to Conrad Bennett, who owed Whitfield $180,000 in covered gambling debts. The message was identical to each emergency board meeting. 30 minutes. Conference room A, non-negotiable. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in the vocabulary of collaboration, and all 3 men understood exactly what was being called in. The conference room smelled like old coffee and leather chairs when Whitfield arrived with a tablet loaded with the parking lot surveillance footage. He didn't need to speak first. The power flowed from him like diesel exhaust from a running engine, the kind that fills everything around it until you can't breathe without tasting it. Pierce arrived first, then Sterling, then Bennett, each man settling into a chair with the comfortable posture of people accustomed to moving money and bodies without questions. Whitfield set the tablet on the table. The video played silently. Megan on the pavement. The man collapsed. Her hands moving with precision that belonged in an operating theater, not a parking lot. Her chest compressions. The moment she'd made the decision to cut. She performed an authorized surgery, Whitfield said. His voice was smooth as ice on a frozen lake. Open thoracotomy. Cardiac massage performed by a nurse with 3 weeks of employment in our facility. If he survives and files suit, this hospital's liability insurance won't cover it. If he dies and his family discovers what she did, we're looking at felony criminal charges for practicing medicine without a license. He paused. Let that settle. She's a liability. We remove her tonight. Pierce leaned back in his chair. What do you need? 3 things, Whitfield said. First, you call her references at Providence Portland and make it clear she was terminated for instability and poor judgment. Second, you authorize an outside investigator to examine her personnel file and her educational credentials for discrepancies. Third, you make sure she's escorted from the building by security before midnight, with a termination letter citing violation of scope of practice. He looked at each man in turn. Any questions? There were none. The phone calls happened simultaneously. Whitfield made one while his allies made theirs. The references at Providence Portland received calls from board members saying things like concerning behavioral patterns seemed to operate outside her training, and we had to let her go due to poor judgment calls. The words weren't true, but they had the weight of institutional authority behind them, and institutional authority is a weapon that never needs bullets. By the time the calls ended, Megan's professional reputation had been poisoned in 3 separate networks, and she didn't know it yet. At 8:15 p.m., security was instructed to escort Master Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien from the building. She wasn't told why until the termination letter was placed in her hands, printed, cold, corporate boilerplate, effective immediately, termination of employment for practicing beyond the scope of licensure, specifically performing an authorized surgical intervention without medical degree or appropriate credentialing, creating liability for Seattle General. Dr. Whitfield's digital signature sat at the bottom, impersonal as a bank transfer. She didn't argue. She didn't call a lawyer. The coffee went cold. The waitress refilled it anyway. Megan stared at the steam rising from the cup and thought about the 6-year-old boy. She remembered the weight of him in her arms. She remembered his name, Minwali, and the way his blood had soaked through her uniform while she ran 3 kilometers through fields of fire with a bullet in her thigh and a broken wrist that wouldn't heal right for 6 months. She remembered promising him he would be okay. She remembered keeping that promise. And now she'd apparently saved him twice in his lifetime and destroyed her life both times. At 3:17 a.m. her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Single text message, 1100. Megan stared at the screen. 10 seconds. 20. Then she typed, location. The response came in 4 seconds, Seattle General main entrance. She almost laughed. They'd fired her. She was banned from the premises. Showing up would mean arrest, would mean burning whatever fragments of her cover remained. Instead, she powered off the phone, paid for the coffee she hadn't touched, and drove back to her apartment through empty Savannah streets. At 3:45 a.m. she pulled the combat boots from her car and carried them inside. At 4:48 a.m. she polished them until the leather reflected the ceiling light like a mirror. At 6:33 a.m. she showered. At 6:16 a.m. she put on her only civilian dress, navy blue, simple, the kind of thing a nurse would wear to a hospital meeting. At 7:36 a.m. she placed the boots in her passenger seat and drove back toward Seattle General, no plan, no backup, nothing but a time, a place, and the faintest thread of hope that someone, somewhere, understood exactly who she was. The sound of rotors first registered as vibration rather than noise. Megan felt it through the asphalt at 10:58 a.m., standing alone in the parking lot, the same parking lot where she'd opened a man's chest 5 hours earlier. By 11:19 a.m. the helicopters were visible, 2 Black Hawks descending through Savannah's humid air like mechanical predators, their downdraft scattering loose paperwork and leaves across the pavement. Megan's breath caught as the rotors cut their speed and 200 soldiers in dress uniform began emerging from the cargo bays. They moved in perfect synchronization, boots hitting concrete in waves of sound that echoed off the hospital's concrete walls. Formation. Perfect formation. Organized like a tactical insert, not a hospital visit. Inside the main lobby, Dr. Whitfield was mid-sentence about hospital liability protocols and new safety initiatives when the main doors burst open. A brigadier general entered first, her uniform bearing the insignia of command authority that only comes from navigating 3 decades of military bureaucracy. Behind her walked Colonel James Mitchell in dress uniform, alive, standing, his boots polished to mirror shine. And beside them moved a master sergeant carrying a file folder the size of a brick. The room went silent so completely you could hear the fluorescent lights humming above. Whitfield's mouth opened. No words came out. The general's voice cut through the confusion like a blade, "I'm looking for Master Chief Trident." Confused faces. Security guard Chen, a retired Navy gunner's mate, suddenly went rigid. His clipboard clattered to the floor. His voice came out like a salute given in words, "Master Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien. 3 Navy Crosses. Silver Star. 23 years Naval Special Warfare. Present and accounted for, sir." All 43 people in the lobby turned. Megan stood in the doorway, still in her civilian dress, still carrying the cardboard box of her discarded life. Her face remained perfectly still. Her eyes went forward. Military at ease, but with the subtle difference that at ease isn't a posture, it's a refusal to flinch. The brigadier general opened Megan's service jacket file. She read for 4 minutes straight. Not rushed. Each sentence landing with deliberate weight. Marja, Helmand Province. 2009, 7 Combat Tours. 2 Purple Hearts. Bronze Star. First sentence of the Silver Star citation took 45 seconds to read aloud. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward while the general continued reading, and his voice came out rough with emotion that 30 years of military training couldn't quite suppress. When I was 6 years old in Marja, Master Chief O'Brien carried me 2 miles through enemy fire with a bullet in her leg and a broken wrist that wouldn't take weight. He paused. His eyes found Dr. Whitfield's. Last night in your parking lot, she brought me back from the dead with her bare hands. For the second time in my life, I'm alive because this woman refused to let me die. Mitchell bent down, unlaced his boots, placed them on the hospital tile beside the pair of worn combat boots Megan had carried from her car. 10 seconds of silence stretched like a held breath. Then the master sergeant's voice cut the air. Company, attention! 200 soldiers snapped a salute in perfect unison, the sound echoing through the lobby like a thunderclap that shook the windows, and Megan's composure finally cracked, not tears, just the smallest tremor in her jaw, her eyes remaining forward as her entire body acknowledged what was happening. The woman who'd arrived 3 weeks ago practicing invisibility was now standing in the center of the brightest light she'd ever known, and there was nowhere left to hide. The rotor wash hit the hospital windows like a fist, and Megan felt the building shudder around her. 11 o'clock. Exactly. The lobby fell silent in stages. First the staff stopped talking, then the visitors froze mid-step, then even the overhead pages seemed to pause as if the building itself was holding its breath. 2 Black Hawks descended through the morning haze like birds of prey, their shadows swallowing the parking lot whole. The soldiers emerged in waves, 200 of them, boots hitting asphalt in perfect synchronization, the sound carrying all the way through the building. Megan heard it from inside the lobby. That unmistakable rhythm. Dress uniforms, pressed and immaculate. They moved with the terrifying fluid precision of apex predators who trained together for years, not minutes, and the civilians around them instinctively stepped back, creating space the way prey animals create distance from something they don't understand. Dr. Whitfield had assembled the staff for what he'd called a hospital safety initiative presentation. The board chairman had approved it. A photo opportunity for his upcoming promotion. Instead, he was standing in a packed administrative lobby with 300 eyes watching a brigadier general stride through the front entrance, boots clicking on marble tile like a metronome counting down to something irreversible. The general's uniform carried more ribbons than Megan had seen in years, 3 rows, each one a story written in fabric. His presence made the air pressure change. The staff could feel it. Dr. Whitfield could feel it too, and his jaw tightened as he realized something had gone catastrophically wrong with his morning. The master sergeant's voice cut through the lobby like a blade through surgical gloves. Master Chief Trident, front and center. Not a request. A command. The room didn't just go quiet, it calcified into absolute silence. The kind of silence that comes from 300 people realizing simultaneously that they've been standing on the wrong side of something enormous. The retired Navy gunner working security, a man named Holloway, gray-haired, with scars on his knuckles and a medal pinned inside his jacket that nobody knew about until this moment, snapped to attention. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 24 years of military protocol. Master Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien. 3 Navy Crosses. Silver Star. 23 years Naval Special Warfare. Each credential fell like a thunderclap. 3 Navy Crosses. The room's collective breath caught somewhere around the second one. The Silver Star hung in the air like a physical presence, and Dr. Whitfield's face went white. Then red. The Brigadier General stepped forward, and Megan's service record unfolded like a map of sacrifice. For minutes. He read for uninterrupted minutes while the staff listened to coordinates and dates that meant nothing to them but everything to the general. Marja. Helmand Province. 7 combat deployments. A 2007 operation where she'd extracted a 6-year-old boy from a collapsed building during active firefight. Classified operation spanning the entire war. The general's voice never wavered, never softened, never once made it sound like anything less than extraordinary. Colonel Mitchell stood. The man Megan had saved in the parking lot. He was wearing his dress uniform now, a green beret officer carrying himself with the kind of military bearing that came from 20 years of leadership, but his eyes were fixed on Megan with something that looked like recognition of a kind most people never experienced. He removed his boots. Just took them off and held them, showing the room the wear, the scuffs, the dust of years embedded in the leather. Then he placed them next to Megan's combat boots, the pair she'd been keeping in her locker, the one she wore on the worst days when she needed to remember who she actually was. "She carried me 2 miles through enemy fire when I was 6 years old," Mitchell said, his voice steady as medication dripping through and through. "She brought me out of the building when the roof was coming down. 23 years later, she brought me back from the dead in a parking lot with her bare hands." He paused. The hospital had stopped existing. Nothing but this moment, this truth, this collision of 2 lives that had been tethered across decades and continents. "I never forgot her. And when I was lying on that asphalt with no pulse and no hope, my body remembered something my conscious mind couldn't articulate." He looked at the general. "A soldier who'd already saved me once." 10 seconds. That's what the silence lasted. 10 full seconds where nobody moved, nobody blinked, and Dr. Whitfield's career died in real time, visible on every news camera recording the event. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Nothing came out. The hospital board chairman, a man named Brennan who'd been standing beside Dr. Whitfield for the photo opportunity, physically stepped away. Created distance like a man stepping back from something radioactive. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of legal counsel already calculating the hospital's liability exposure. "Dr. Whitfield, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." He turned to Holloway, who was already moving forward, and the guard's movements carried zero ambiguity. This wasn't a suggestion. But the general wasn't finished. The way he continued talking while Dr. Whitfield was being escorted out suggested he'd anticipated this exact moment, planned for this exact sequence. "We've been in contact with federal investigators regarding billing irregularities at this facility." 2 men in suits entered behind the soldiers, and the temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. Badges. Federal credentials. The kind that made administrators sweat. Master Chief O'Brien wasn't just working here. She was conducting a classified investigation into medical fraud affecting veteran care. Inflated billing codes. Kickback arrangements. Geriatric patients, many of them former service members, being coded for procedures they never received. The charge nurse from the geriatric floor spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. He had her reassigned 2 days after she started questioning the billing codes. Said she wasn't competent enough. The words hung in the air like an accusation that suddenly made sense. Another nurse added, he tried to get her fired 3 times. Before the parking lot. Made up complaints about her charting. Dr. Whitfield pulled away from Holloway's grip, tried to move toward the general. "This is absurd. I'm a physician. 15 years at this institution." The general cut him off with a tone that didn't require volume to land like a punch. "You humiliated a decorated war veteran. You interfered with a federal investigation. You attempted to terminate her for saving a man's life." He paused. Master Chief O'Brien needed 2 more weeks to complete her evidence gathering. You couldn't even give her that. As the security team led Dr. Whitfield past Megan, still standing at attention, he wouldn't meet her eyes. The cameras captured everything, him avoiding her gaze, his Rolex catching the light, his face registering the moment he understood he wasn't coming back. The news crews followed him all the way to his car. Recorded him sitting alone in the driver's seat for a long moment before he started the engine and pulled away from Seattle General for the last time. Megan stood motionless while 200 soldiers executed a salute in perfect unison, fist to chest, a gesture that transcended the moment and reached backward through years of service. The sound of their salute was the quietest thing that had happened all morning, and somehow it was the loudest. Just 200 people moving at the same time, acknowledging something most of them would never fully understand about the woman standing before them. The morning sun glinted off the two pairs of combat boots sitting side by side on the hospital steps. One pair worn by a child saved in war. One pair worn by the Master Chief who never stopped serving. By the end of the day, someone had mounted them on a small memorial stand. By the end of the week, there was a plaque beneath them with a single sentence, "Here, a hero reminded us that true courage needs no audience." 6 months later, Megan learned that Dr. Whitfield had taken a job teaching CPR at a community college in Savannah for minimum wage. His medical license was suspended pending civil suits. The investigation she'd started had uncovered a network spanning 4 hospitals, but Seattle General was where it ended. The irony wasn't subtle. The man who'd mocked her competence now teaching teenagers how to perform chest compressions, how to count compressions at the exact rate that kept blood flowing to a failing heart. The same skill set that had saved Colonel Mitchell. Taught by the man who tried to bury her for knowing how to do it. The hospital board personally apologized. Offered her any position she wanted. But Megan had already decided. She was staying. She was teaching. And every single nurse who worked under her would know that speaking up about fraud wasn't a career risk. It was a career requirement. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value, hit that subscribe button. If you believe the world needs more people willing to risk everything for what's right, smash that like button and leave a comment below. And if you know someone with quiet strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself until the moment it matters most, share this story. Because true heroism is what you do when the world stops watching.